Welcome to the Pellet Neros Taylor and Martin Steve show, and perhaps he should be called the John Helmer show because he's on often.
Yes,
A very, very wonderful guest. Good, it's good to have regulars. Like a bit of a pub meeting. This, John, you were saying that you're our Russia expert, and of course you're the doyen of Russia correspondents. Been there since the very, very long time. Um, you said that Putin's chickens are coming home to roost. That contrasts with a lot of the Russia-friendly commentary out there saying that that the Ukrainian offensive was mostly a PR offensive. The 40-day offensive to get Trump's attention with performative attacks on the Amazon of Russia, the straw Wildberry, whatever
yes.
the warehouses, and
Well,
billowing
there, yes.
pictures of smoke over St. Petersburg. But meanwhile, Russia was grinding remorselessly ahead in the Donbass. But you're saying now you're not on their side at all, but you're kind of echoing some of the words we've been hearing from the Atlanticists that Putin is in fact uh, on the defensive. Could you develop that?
Well, the last thing I want to do is to be on the side of the Atlanticists or uh, Miss Applebaum or Foreign Minister Sikorsky or any of that lot. No. Let's try and summarize. On the one hand, yes, you're right, Pele. The Russian ground forces, air forces, drone forces are all pressing consistently ahead and look more capable of completing the task of liberating the Donbass and finally the Donetsk region. There's no doubt about that. Second, there's no doubt that Russia has now succeeded in, as one Russian I was reading a few hours ago said, there's Odessa, but Odessa doesn't have a sea anymore. That's to refer to the fact that Russia has effectively now cut off Odessa and all the ports around Odessa. There are several, from receiving incoming cargoes or shipping out outgoing Ukrainian exports. Now, about 80% of Ukraine's export trade has gone through the Odessa region ports. That's now been cut off. So there's a strong case also that the heavy attacks in the Kiev region have destroyed large numbers of drone manufacturing plants and as well as electricity generation. So what we have, yes, is a significant improvement in the Russian advance to reduce the Ukraine very considerably. Reduce the Ukraine as an economy, yes. Reduce the Ukraine as a polity, yes. But is it likely to reduce the Ukraine as a firing platform with relatively few people, with the west of the Ukraine, the traditional Kiev to Polish border Ukraine that was part of Hitler's gouvernement general during 43 to 45, has the Russian, let's say, advance significantly diminished Ukraine's capacity to inflict continuing drone warfare against inland Russia. No, I haven't got the papers in front of me, but roughly speaking, more than 450 drones were fired at Russia in the last 24-hour period I've seen. So over the weekend, people are dying. Russian civilians are being killed. In Nizhnekamsk, for example, dozens of people were killed. Nizhnekamsk is to the east of Moscow in Tatarstan region. So the intensity of the Ukrainian drone war has not yet been affected by the intensity of the Russian advance. So both sides claiming a sort of tactical initiative are correct. On the one hand, the Russian side is gaining the tactical and operational initiative, no doubt about it, and cutting off the Ukrainian economy by sea It's not doing the same thing by land. It has not yet cut off the Polish border. It has not cut off the land supply from the NATO hub in Rzeszów in Poland. That remains to be done. The public opinion effect of the kinds of attacks you referred to, Peli, the attack on Wildberries, the Russian equivalent of Amazon, and the attacks on the refineries affecting gasoline, air travel, and harvester fueling for the harvest and the replanting. All of that has had two effects. One is to reduce public confidence in the local governors and in the local United Russia ruling party candidates. So it's going to reflect itself in the elections starting September 18. On the other hand, it mobilizes, it generates the traditional rally round the flag. So you have fewer, in the public opinion polls, fewer supporters of peace negotiations. There therefore is less pressure on President Putin to negotiate, go through the motions of negotiating either with the Ukrainians or with the Americans, any form of peace terms. And there's much, much more Russian support for retaliation and getting tougher. And I think we've talked about that before. So that puts fairly, I think, the pros and cons of the, let's call it the battlefield situation in both sides. What I meant by saying that Putin's chickens are coming home to roost both reflect these battlefield conditions put in a strategic sense and some of the transforming foreign news that we should mention for the benefit of everybody watching, and in the hope that they can come in and comment and encourage more discussion. In the first place, we've had this sudden reappearance of the possibility that Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner will appear in Moscow within a week to 10 days. There are various kinds of disasters that are always suspected as coming to Russia in August. To have them, those two, would be a minor kind, but they shouldn't be there at all. Why? TASS has reported that there is the likelihood, an unnamed official, that Witkoff and Kushner will go to Kiev shortly and then will come on to Moscow within 7 to 10 days. That meeting was proposed by Trump. President Trump said it. I'm trying to remember. Yes, he said it following the meeting he had with Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office. What is it now? 10 days ago. He said that meeting was to be arranged. The meeting has not been given a time or a place yet. Kiev hasn't decided to receive them yet. If they go to Kiev, the pressure will increase on President Putin to receive them or to refuse them. President Putin has so far refused to show that there's been a fundamental loss of confidence, as there should have been, in Witkoff and Kushner. Why should there be? Because there's a fundamental loss of confidence in the so-called Trump Anchorage formula. And yet, what we find, and I'm looking around for my papers to find it, we have Deputy Foreign Minister Galuzin, used to be a Japan specialist, showed up in one of the Istanbul rounds of negotiations. Galuzin said just 48 hours ago that Russia is still committed to the original war aims for the special military operation, demilitarization of the battlefield, and denazification of Ukraine, and committed to the Anchorage formula. Well, nobody else in Russia believes that except himself, President Trump, and President Trump's special negotiator for the United States, Kirill Dmitriev. So by repeating this line, what you have is a reminder that though officials, businesses, everybody, including my office, goes on holiday in August, we still have this lingering chicken that might come home to roost, and it won't come home to roost for the President Putin's benefit if Witkoff and Kushner come in, since there's no sign the US is willing to concede any terms, and there's every sign that the Zelensky, as it were, escalation is designed to show the Europeans and the Americans and Trump that that Ukraine can fight on for another 2 years, at least 2 years, with no economy, with no export economy, with no seaborne export economy, with fewer and fewer men on the front lines. Yes, all of those things it can do. Of course, that makes Zelensky richer, but attacking the Ukrainian economy doesn't either bring peace negotiations, nor does it deter Zelensky from the NATO war aim. That's one of the chickens. Going further afield, I think I need to point out that in the last few, over the weekend days, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan have announced a new so-called defense pact. This is happening at the same time as over the weekend, Russia has announced with Syria a memorandum of agreement on the future of the former Russian naval base at Tartus and the former Russian air base at Khmeimim. These are both on the Mediterranean coast of Syria. These two agreements are Putin's chickens coming home to roost, and not favorably for Russia. Why? Well, because the downfall of President Assad and the unwillingness and incapability of Russia and Iran to defend the Assad regime, allowing al-Shara Jalani, the current president of Syria, with Turkish help to take over in Damascus, has partitioned Syria, given Turkey a very important slice, the Mediterranean coast of Syria, heading towards Lebanon. And what Turkey is now doing is building an even further regional expansion with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, both with US encouragement, there's no doubt about that, and as a potential alternative to the US if it happened that following the course of the Iran war, the US doesn't rebuild some of its bases. Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are now offering a regional framework, not only to defend themselves, but to threaten the US and Israeli enemies in the region, and that's principally Iran, right? So where's Russia in that combination? At a considerable disadvantage. Why? Because it's just had to agree, and it just did agree with Jalani's regime, that Jalani will take over what's called civilian management of the Tartus naval base and the Khmeimim air base. And it's not clear yet who will guard the perimeter fence at Khmeimim. Remember, the perimeter fence at Khmeimim was the refuge that Russia defended when Jalani started murdering Alawites and Christians. All the refugees from Jalani's purge of all of his enemies in Syria sought to seek refuge through that fence. If Russia has now abandoned the fence, essentially allowing Khmeimim to become a Syrian airbase, which will serve different functions, which have yet to be specified in the agreement, at the same time that Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan are developing an extra regional military arrangement. What we have here is the total defeat of all of the Russian investment in cooperation with Turkey, with Syria, and with Saudi Arabia in an attempt to protect and secure also Russia's relationship with Iran. I don't want to make this too complicated. I don't want to talk for too long, but I have to say that these are very important developments. I'm grateful to my Greek colleagues, my Beirut colleague Vanessa Beeley, and others, certainly the Arab correspondents, who are reporting the significance of Jalani's takeover of Khmeimim and Tartus, Jalani's attempt to mobilize new forces that might or will with Trump's encouragement, invade northern Lebanon. You've got a complete transformation that's happening, and not simply part of the Israeli-Iran war. And this is one of the results of the weakness or the vacuum that Putin left behind when he abandoned Assad, and Assad fled to Moscow. So there's another chicken that's coming home to roost, and it favors the US. It favors it considerably for the longer term.
I'll ask you a question. What this Saudi Turkish alliance, Pakistani alliance, but will it also will America look on this? I mean, is it not equally aimed at the United States? Which can't guarantee the Gulf states their security anymore. So could Russia take some solace from that?
Well, the problem, in theory, it's possible. In practice, I don't find any source who believes it's likely. Why?
I agree.
Basically, Turkey and the presidency of Tayyip Recep Erdogan is ending. The man is seriously ill, and the succession for Erdogan is underway in Turkey. And there's no sign that the successors to Erdogan would be less pro-American than he is, or more regionally independent. The sign of this is the Turkish readiness to reach an agreement with Trump for the acquisition of F-35s, and in return to agree to the Trump demand, or the American demand, that Turkey give up its Russian S-400s. I think we've talked about this before. Turkey is proposing to transfer its S-400s either to Saudi Arabia, which would now come within the Saudi-Turkish Pakistani Defense Pact, or to the UAE, or to Qatar. It's not clear where the transfer will be. What is very clear is that the Iranian-Russian Defense Partnership Agreement of January 2025 would not allow such a transfer. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is a hostile state in the present war. So is the UAE, so is Qatar. Now, if Turkey is taking over one of the roles that US has been damaged by Iran for the United States in Saudi Arabia, I think it's to reinforce the Saudi orientation towards the United States. It's too early to imagine in the long term that Saudi Arabia would with the Turks, develop an independent orientation away from the United States. It's much more likely, I think, to see this pact as US encouraged, US armed, and Saudi paid for. And of course, it encourages Turkish free hand, especially in Syria, especially towards Lebanon, especially in the Mediterranean. And that's why one sees in the Greek press some confusion on the part of the present Greek government, which has been supplying a Patriot missile battery to protect Yanbu and the Yanbu pipeline for Saudi Arabia's oil exports to go out the Red Sea. So you have the only criticism of this pact that's been over the weekend has come from the Greek Communist Party, which has editorialized that if that's what the Saudi Arabians plan to do with the Turks, then it's the sooner Greece pulls out its Patriot missile battery from Yanbu, the better. The sooner the Greek Navy is pulled out of defending the Saudi oil flow, the better. So Greece is taking this pact as a hostile act against Greece and its role as a collective protector of Saudi oil flow, Red Sea oil flow, and so on. But that's only the Communist Party that's saying that. The government doesn't think that, and the Greek press is in considerable confusion. Now, why am I referring to the Greek press? Because of all the sources of analysis of Turkish ill will in Europe, the Greeks are the experts, right? The Greeks are the experts. So I think that
but sorry,
we have to see the pact as a US success at Russia and Iran's disadvantage.
Okay, Marty, yeah.
Yeah. No, John, that was simply masterful. Masterful. And it should have been emblazoned on all across the op-ed pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, as you well know. Not to mention our old friends, if one can still call them that, at PBS, at Public Broadcasting and CNN. And everyone's, am I right in saying, as far as the American and British media goes, everything you have just said, they're not even suppressing it, they're totally ignorant of it. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Well, everybody's on holiday. I mean,
well, that's one thing.
First.
The cop-out, we know that.
Okay, August for you and me and Pele as journalists is always a short news month. So if we're left at minding the press,
except when there's a world war,
yeah. It ought to be fuel for fire for the journalists and the analysts left minding the pump at home. But it's not. It's not. That's true. It's also not being noticed in the Russian press over the weekend and now. But then the Russian press has been extremely reluctant to peer too closely into the Russian-Syrian negotiations and the Russian loss of its position in Syria. So yes, it ought to be looked at, the future of Syria, Israel, Turkey expanding into northern Lebanon. That ought to be part of any discussion of the long-term so-called peace arrangements that the Iran war is about. But it isn't. Okay, it isn't. What can we say?
What about the Turkish-Israeli conflict? Because obviously, the United States is allied with Israel. Turkey is forming this new pact, and you're saying it's not aimed at the United States, but at some point earlier this year, America, the Israelis were talking big about taking on the Turks. So where does it leave that conflict, or that conflict in waiting?
Look, the Turkey continues to be a very important source of oil and other support for Israel. No matter what President Erdogan says rhetorically, no matter what the more fundamental Islamic criticisms within Turkish politics are of Israel, Turkey has not acted in a hostile way towards Israel in the present war. What Turkey has done is expand its own traditional Ottoman era influence and occupation in Syria, which was an Ottoman region, and it's captured the most important, for commercial purposes, the most important part of Ottoman Syria was the Mediterranean coast. Well, they've got it now. That's first. To hold it, they have to maintain a special relationship with the regime in Damascus, whether that's ruled by Jalani or others, or his successors. That threatens Israel's expansion. Remember, Israel is now within shooting distance of Damascus. It's on the plain at the foot of the Golan Heights. And so Israel is also part of the partition of Syria. And so there is a natural Israeli reluctance to see the Ottoman Empire creep towards Damascus, because that would be negative for Israel's ambitions. They don't share, for example, the same readiness to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel does, the Turks do not. But it's unclear how far the Turks can be persuaded, bought off by the United States to join a campaign against Hezbollah in northern Lebanon. So my own primitive, superficial view is don't pay too much attention to Israeli rhetoric or Turkish rhetoric against each other. Yes. Turkey, let's leave it at that.
Marty, yeah.
No, again, John, an utterly brilliant analysis, unconventional in the very best sense. You reverse all the assumed polarities in the West, which have not made sense and are just conflicting chaos, which nobody tries to make sense of, and by bringing this totally different perspective on the real significance of the new alliance of the Turkey, Saudi, Pakistan alliance, you make the region coherent. And you especially make it coherent to me because in the incredibly distant past, even before you had your early incarnation as a highly respected official in the Carter administration, I was at a much more humble level, starting out studying the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire and the ambitious British plans to succeed it for the next 400 years. Well, we saw how that worked out at the end of World War I and in the immediate decade afterwards. And of course, then we had the American version under Eisenhower in the 1950s, in which we had the same players today. We had NATO, we had Saudi Arabia, strongly in the American camp, with its alliance with the American oil industry. We had Turkey and in Pakistan, and in those days, the other player in the American card, as they assumed, of course, was Iran, and now Iran's on the other side. But you also bring out something which really hasn't been true for 400 years, and that is that although Turkey and Iran have been rival fading bigwigs for nearly half a millennium in the region, that the era of great conflict between them, the great clash between them, was back in the 16th century, a rather long time ago. But it seems to me from what you're saying that Erdogan is leaving to his successors a problem of confrontation, not just both with Russia and with Iran. And,
yes, I think you're right.
Yes, and right now, as you point out, which nobody in the West notes, especially not critics of Trump, actually, Trump and his people and the Israelis and Erdogan also appear to be on the rise against Russia and against Iran. I agree completely with your analysis, but what I would then ask you is does that not provoke the danger that the Turks, I don't think, even have the wits to realize themselves at the moment, of a very dangerous reaction against them, of Iran backed by Russia, and ultimately at a safer distance, also supported with a friendly cooperation and protection of China? May we see a pushback from Russia and Iran against this new American-Israeli-supported neo-CENTO?
Good questions. Do you want to go, Pelly, or you want me to respond?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Please.
Well, no pushback from Russia. Why? Because Russia has put too many, to use to beat the chicken metaphor a bit much. Putin has put too many eggs in Erdogan's basket. Russia needs Turkey as the only member of NATO that is significantly resisting the war against Russia's gas and oil trade through the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. He has ignored all of the strategic advice on the unreliability of the Turkish Sultan. He's rejected all of the Russian historical memory of the unreliability of the Ottomans in their historical relationship with Russia. There can't be a pushback by Russia now. There'd be much more worry about the succession to Erdogan as becoming a much more committed anti-Russian Ankara, Turkish capital, than there is at the moment. On the other hand, Iran has to be very worried, and obviously is not going to surface that worry in the press. It has to be worried about Turkish mobilization on the of so-called Kurdish proxies. The proxy troops that Jelani has assembled, they comprise Uyghurs, they comprise Chechens, they comprise every jihadi fundamentalist who's short of a job or a battlefield to fight on. Turkey can use these forces, both going westward into Lebanon and eastward into Iran. Iran has to be worried about that. Then there's no shortage of US support for the so-called Kurdish rebellion that would come in, attack Iran from the west. So far it hasn't happened, but it's a clear substitute in US thinking for US troops on the ground. The second part is Pakistan. Pakistan is also a potential platform for attacking Iran from the east, for allowing US special forces and any other special forces that the Pakistani military regime will allow to use Pakistan as that kind of a platform. Does Pakistan dare? Well, Pakistan doesn't have very much courage. It has empty pockets. What Pakistan does for courage gets put in its pocket by Saudi Arabia. And that's where Saudi Arabia is basically holding up the Pakistani economy. That leaves India highly threatened by this arrangement. Now, I'm assured by Indian sources over the weekend that Prime Minister Modi isn't the slightest bit deterred from the thinking that another war that could be launched by a Pakistani so-called terrorism incident would force the Indians to think twice about counterattacking, because under this pact, an Indian counterattack on Pakistan would be treated under this pact, as so far reported, as an attack on Turkey, as an attack on Saudi Arabia. Well, in other words, a version of NATO Article 5. Prime Minister Modi and his embattled Foreign Minister Jaishankar now have to explain why their much vaunted Indian plan for using United Arab Emirates, cross Arabian Peninsula plan for moving Indian trade to Europe, why it's failed so dismally, and why India put itself on the Israeli US side against Iran to a considerable economic disadvantage of India. And now the Indian side faces this new complication in Arab politics, which they weren't expecting. Well, the man responsible for that in Indian politics is Foreign Minister Jaishankar. Until now, he's been the expert for advisor to Prime Minister Modi on how to handle President Trump. He hasn't done very well at that. He's been a total failure in advising how to align with India with Israel against Iran, and now this. So this pact raises all sorts of strategic problems for India, for Russia. Russia is least capable of acting now. This puts a kibosh on Foreign Minister Lavrov's proposal for a inter-Arab, inter-regional security pact, because it works against the Russian idea of a cooperation of all. So Russia loses out of this. India loses potentially. The US gains. And Iran perhaps loses most immediately. That's how I would write the scorecard.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, I've got to wind up. They've got 2 minutes left.
Sure.
I mean, what you've said is an absolute masterclass of I
Yes.
mean, I've written some diplomatic history. Read a lot of diplomatic history. I've read telegrams. This is how diplomats reason. You know, it's like a
Exactly.
chessboard, a multipolar chessboard where everyone is planning their options against each other and what can they get away with, what are their pressure points, what can they extract. In a way, nations, like human beings, we all in our world, as it were, see what advantages we can get out of other people, where we have to push and where we have to lean back and where we have to pay off favors and things like that. But that's not the map of the world you get from reading any of our media, which is the bad guys versus good guys, and then nations act in a completely random way. Things just happen just like that, and then there's a wicked, evil man at the back behind it. And then even like Foreign Affairs, this prestigious journal, always writes from an American perspective. I mean, your stuff is far superior. And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
like the best of the World War One diplomatic historians who didn't take sides. Germany's bad, Britain is good, but saying all this nations weighing their options very carefully. But these books come out after the event. You're giving us a real live summary of how they're thinking. So thank you so
Exactly.
much for that, John. And I'll try and put it out as soon as possible. And thank you, Martin. And see you tomorrow. Thank you, John. So see you in
Gentlemen, a
2 weeks.
joy and a pleasure. Thank you, John. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Mark. Thank